Hi there, and welcome to our session today. I am Stephen. Uh, I'm an early talent coordinator here at Channel 4. Um, so what we're going to be running through today is firstly looking at CVs, putting together CVs. Then we're going to be looking at putting together applications, so written applications and cover letters, which sometimes you're asked to submit with your CV depending on the role. So, for example, with our apprenticeships, we always ask for people to fill out additional questions. So, we're going to be talking through some good approaches for that. Then, we're going to be looking at LinkedIn and how you can use LinkedIn as a tool to be able to do your job search, what kind of thing you might want to have on your LinkedIn profile, and the best ways to get the most out of that. And then we'll briefly be looking at personal statements. So, personal statements are things that you want to, they basically sum you up and give a really brief synopsis of who you are and what you want to do. Think of it like the blurb on the back of a book. You want to kind of incorporate that into your CV and into your LinkedIn. So, we'll be taking a look at that as well. Cool. So if we head on to start looking at CVs. So here we have a terrible example of a CV. Um, People rarely make all of these mistakes in the one CV, but people frequently make one or more of these mistakes in their CV. So from a recruiter point of view, I'll kind of talk you through what is maybe not great about this CV, and why. So I mean, first off, it's kind of jarring to look at. I mean, if we start with the candidate's name, poor candidate, her her name at the top of the CV, A, is really off center. So that kind of aligning is just it makes it visually look a lot more professional, and also it's using word art, which I would say, as a rule, never use on a CV, and probably there's not many uses for it in general. Um, but yeah, so then we look at some of the information that's on here. This, uh, so Candy has put her date of birth on it. It's never necessary to put your date of birth on a CV. Um, it goes into one of those categories of protected characteristics. So we as a company are never going to be able to ask you for your date of birth, because it can mean all sorts of potential discrimination. So really, we don't want to know that information. So leave off the date of birth. Um, they have their phone number on there, which is great. We do need that. Um, they have their full address. You don't really need to put your full address on a CV. This kind of harkens back to when people would have been applying for roles via, the post, snail mail. Um, Companies are really unlikely to write to you as opposed to pick up the phone or send you an email. It can be useful to put in what city you're currently based in so that they know kind of, I guess, whether they need to have that conversation with you about potentially relocating, or where you're based. And it's also really useful to know, let's say, for example, with this candidate, if we were hiring for a role in the UK, we know that they're already based in the UK, they're potentially working in the UK, so that they do have right to work. Then marital status. It seems like a really odd thing to see on a CV. We absolutely do see this on CVs. And again, it falls into that category of things we don't want to know. We're never going to ask you at interview or anything what your marital status is. That's actually, again, falls into one of those protected characteristics of actually being illegal to ask. So just don't put it on there. It's not relevant whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're divorced. That's your business, and doesn't come into play in terms of applying for jobs. One of the things that is missing here as well is the email address. So even though Candy has provided us with the full home address, she's forgotten to give us her email address, which is really how most recruiters are going to be interacting with you at that initial stage. So that's a really important thing to put in your CV, because even if you put it in your initial, let's say, bio or application, you just want to have that as many places as possible. So if this CV does, you know, if they end up printing out CVs and then they're going through them manually, that they don't have to then go back into the system and try search for you and find your email address, so that all that information is there and is as readily available as possible. So you want to make the job of the recruiter as easy as possible. Another thing that's on here, which shouldn't be, is a photo. Um, we don't need to know what you look like. I'm sure you look great, but it's not really key for any of our roles. The only time that you'd really put in any kind of career that you'd potentially put a photo on an application would be if it is kind of a looks based role. So if it's a modeling job or if it's an on-screen acting job. But for most office-based roles, it's not important what you look like. It's far more important what's on your CV and what you've done and what you want to do. So don't include a photo, because then it also potentially opens it up for bias and potential discrimination as well. So uh, like, for example, my passport photo, I've had people say to me multiple times that I look like a serial killer, which I don't think I come across as in person, hopefully. But again, it goes back to that idea of bias, that if someone was to look at that photo on my CV, they might immediately make an assumption that, I'm a mean person or an aggressive person or whatever. So if you just make sure that you don't have a photo on there in the first place, then they're just going to focus on the information that you're giving them. Another thing that is bad with this CV, I mean, there's obviously so many things bad with this CV, but the work experience piece um, is in a really weird font, and it's in a color that's too light to read. So some of you mightn't even be able to see it. It's between marital status and the customer assistant line. Um, I would say with CVs in general and kind of any sort of professional documentation, you want to be sticking to max two different fonts, and it's fine if you just stick to one font. You don't need to make your CV super colorful. You don't need to make your CV stand out in that sort of way of using jazzy fonts. The more like straightforward it can be as possible. You want it to be nicely laid out, but you don't need to kind of go overboard in terms of changing all the colors and putting loads of stuff in italics and changing font sizes and everything. As kind of straightforward as it can be, is preferred. Then when we get down into kind of the meat of the CV, so again, this is the type of thing that you definitely want to have on your CV, is some of your work experience. So with this candidate, their most recent work experience, so you should kind of go chronologically. So put your most recent work experience first and then go down. There are other schools of thought. Some people say that you should put your most relevant work experience first. So if you're applying for a sales role, put down, and you've only done one sales role in the past, put down the most relevant one. Again, when you're in early careers, you probably don't have a huge amount of experience to put down. So I would say probably just go chronologically. Um, but yes, so here so Candy has put down they were a customer assistant in Tesco from January 2020 to present. So that's totally, so let's say for example this candidate was applying for an apprenticeship or for any sort of entry level role. That's totally applicable, this customer assistant role in Tesco. So any sort of experience that you have in the workplace is relevant, because we talk an awful lot about transferable skills. So that's the idea of the skills that you've used in that job, even though this person might be then coming in to work in an office role and doing, let's say, admin, there's still a lot of overlap of the experiences that she's had in that previous role and the skills that she's built up that she can use in the role that she's coming into. So even though the fact that this role is a service industry role in Tesco, that's not the bad thing here. The bad thing is that she's listed off responsible for. So responsible for stacking shelves, helping customers, closing at the end of the night, all of those things. And the reason why you shouldn't approach it like that is because looking at this CV, I've no idea whether she's good at that job or not. I know that these are the responsibilities that she has, but I don't know, is she working 4 days a week and putting in the absolute bare minimum when she's there? Or is she really excelling at this role? Because obviously I would rather interview and hire someone who's really good at the role that they're currently in rather than is just kind of ticking the boxes and managing not to be fired. So with what she's listed off here, I've no idea whether she's good at this or not. So if we take a look at the same candidate with a kind of revamped CV, so you can see immediately it's a lot cleaner to look at. We've taken out all of the different colors, we've taken out the photo, all of the multiple different fonts that are there, and it's just a lot cleaner to look at. And we've only included the relevant information. So name is at the very top of it. We have the contact information, so the phone number, and we also have the email address, which we were missing on the last one. We've shortened down that address to just be London, UK, because again, we don't need the full house address. Pronouns, that's up to yourself whether you do or don't include them. Um, Sometimes people just feel more comfortable having the pronouns out there. I think particularly if you maybe have a name that isn't kind of super gender specific, you might want to put your pronouns on there. But again, totally up to you, not an obligation at all. And then what we go on to is the personal statement. So this again is what I was talking about earlier, is kind of like the blurb on the back of a book. It gives me a summary of this candidate before I read through their CV. So I can immediately see, oh, actually, this person is. So here it has candidate is passionate about providing excellent customer experience and has over 2 years' experience in a fast paced, customer facing role. In addition to this, she has 4 years providing guidance and mentoring to vulnerable youth. So this is the exact same information that's on the other CV, the exact same person, but you can see that how it's worded and how it's laid out makes this candidate seem a lot more exciting, a lot more experienced, and a lot more suitable for the role that they're applying for than the previous CV did. So it's really putting your best foot forward and putting all of that information front and center. We'll talk a little bit about the best way to approach writing your personal statement, but your personal statement really should be at the top of your CV and also at the top of your LinkedIn profile as well. Then we move on to work experience, and also you can see through this CV that there's lines that just kind of help visually break it up. So rather than feeling like you need to use lots of different fonts or lots of different colors, these lines are just a good way to kind of clearly delineate between when you're talking about work experience, when you're talking about volunteering, when you're talking about education. So, what's different about how we've framed this role under work experience in comparison to the last one? As I was saying, we were just listing off responsibilities there, and I had no idea whether that person was good at it or not. This person has used the approach of I did X, um, which achieved Y, which can be measured by Z. So, an example of that, A, they increased sales of frozen treats. So that's what they did. They managed to increase the sales. They increased the sales by 20%. So we can measure. So, did they sell one more ice cream or did they increase the sales by 20%, which is actually quite a lot? So I can see that that action that that person took had a really positive impact. And then the how. So by relocating seasonal signage. So let's say, for example, they put the signs for ice creams up the front of the shop. So that makes me think, okay, this person has initiative, they have good ideas, and they're able to kind of measure whether something worked or not. And then again, going up to the one before that, the point before that, awarded Employee of the Week 3 consecutive weeks due to outstanding customer service. So again, that lets me know not only do they do this job, but they do it really well, and they've been recognized by their managers for doing it well. So this immediately seems like a much more appealing candidate to previously, even though they have the exact same experience. Another thing that I really recommend if you are early in your career is to put down any volunteering or any kind of side hobbies that you have. So, for example, this person was a squad leader for a youth group, and they mentioned that in their personal statement as well, that they have 4 years providing guidance and mentoring to vulnerable youth. That's really appealing to an employer because it lets me know that you're active, that you're doing something that is like engaging with the community or following your passions. So other things like, for example, if you did a lot of um, like editing on films that were just a hobby. Like you're not being paid for them, but you and your friends like to kind of create content. That's super interesting and useful, and something that you can point to on your CV as, something that you do outside of paid work that again is building up those skill sets. So really do think about all of the things that you spend your time on, um, rather than just saying, oh, well, I've only had one paid job or I haven't had a paid job before, because you definitely have experience to put in a CV. It's just about how you frame it. Some pieces of advice for putting together your CV or editing your CV if you already have one. Super, super important. Any recruiter will tell you this. Tailor your CV to the job that you're applying for. So sometimes people will have the approach of putting together a CV that kind of lays out, their a broad spectrum of what they do, and then we'll send that out to every role that is possibly applicable. And the problem with that is, so you've sent it out to 100 recruiters for 100 different roles that have slightly different skill sets or slightly different things that they're looking for in candidates. I'm the recruiter, I get that CV, I look at it, and I say, I don't really see how this person fits this particular role. So I'm going to put that to the side and look at the other candidates. You are going to have a much better chance of getting called to interview if rather than applying for 100 roles with the one CV, you apply for 5 roles, 10 roles, but actually go through the job description, look at the skills that are being looked for, and make tweaks to your CV that make you really applicable for that role. So, one way of doing that is looking at the type of language that they use in the job descriptions. So, are they looking for exceptional organizational skills? And then you say to yourself, okay, well, actually, I have experience, that I can demonstrate that I have good organizational skills. So I'm going to incorporate that into my CV, and I might take out one point that's not relevant, and swap it in to highlight how good my organizational skills are. Because then, as a recruiter, I can say these are the kind of the minimum requirements or minimum skills that we're looking for. Does this person have these? Yes, tick, tick, tick. Let's put them through to the next stage. So, really, absolutely, it's super important that you tailor those CVs to each job and you don't have to start from scratch every time, but just making those really little tweaks is going to make a huge difference. I've already touched on this, but highlight your achievements with the format I achieved X by doing Y, resulting in Z. So again, really pointing at measurable impacts that you've had and telling me that you're really good at your job, not just that, you did the bare minimum. Limited to 2 pages of relevant information. Um, like I don't think that you need to you don't need to list what primary school you went to, for example. That's not really relevant to a role. If you have, if you're someone who is a university graduate, I probably wouldn't put your GCSE results on there, for example, because it's not super relevant. Um, but any kind of additional learning that you've done outside, so whether it's workshops that you've participated in, whether it's self-led LinkedIn trainings or self-led trainings that you've done, do put those on if they're relevant. If you can't fill 2 pages, don't stress about it. It's not a minimum. 2 pages isn't the minimum and maximum, it's the maximum. So if you can only fill 1 page of relevant information with your CV and you're quite early on in your career, that's totally fine. As long as it's good information, well presented, then 1 page will absolutely do. Look online for clean, clear templates. So again, if you're someone who's not super into, formatting documents, and I mean, there are people out there who are really into it. Personally, I love putting together a good slide deck. But if you're not someone who's that way minded, just Google like CV templates, resume templates, and take a look for one that you like. There's so many out there, and you can just swap in your information for it. So you don't have to start from scratch in terms of formatting a document or finding something that looks nice. As I said, clean, clear, concise is all you need. Ask someone to proofread for you. This happens uh, so frequently that people will have spelling or grammar mistakes on their CV because if you're looking at it again and again, you kind of become blind to certain parts of it. And also, if you're swapping information in and out because you're tailoring it for different roles, you're really likely to make mistakes. And I think that particularly for roles where attention to detail is really important, um, that kind of communicates something to the recruiters and to the hiring managers that maybe you don't have great attention to detail. So just ask someone else to proofread it for you. They don't need to be an expert in this area. They just need to be a fresh set of eyes to have a look over it. So it could be a friend, a family member, um, you know, a colleague, another student, anyone who kind of is willing to give 5 minutes to take a look at it. And then save your CV as a PDF to avoid reformatting in different programs. So if you are using Microsoft Word or Google Docs to actually create your CV, sometimes if that's loaded into a different platform, so let's say, for example, if you're using Google Docs and the recruiter opens it in Microsoft Word, the formatting that you worked really hard on to make sure that it was all beautifully aligned and that the spacing was all really nice, it can go really wonky and it can just be really hard to read and the dates might be out of line with the information that you've put in. If you save it as a PDF and you send it on as a PDF, then it's going to stay exactly as you designed it and as you intended it to look at. So yeah, I would recommend saving whichever platform you're using to make the CV, save it as a PDF and send it on like that. Also, I'll just say we do have if you have any questions as we go through, do feel free to drop them in the chat below, and I'll answer them as we go through. So now we're going to look at putting together an application. So this is again, it can be additional questions that they might ask you to put together with your CV or a cover letter that they're going to ask you to put in. And there's just some advice in terms of how you approach that. Particularly if you're early on in your career. One, I would say, is really demonstrate your passion for this particular opportunity. So this goes back to kind of tailoring your application for each role. So why do you want to work for this specific company? And why do you want to do this specific role? So if you are, applying for, let's say, for example, a um, digital editing apprenticeship at Channel 4, why do you want to work at Channel 4 as opposed to, any other place that creates digital content? What kind of excites you about Channel 4? What's your relationship with Channel 4? And then why that specific role as well. So, do you just want to get a job, or do you really want this particular job because you're excited by the type of work, you think that it'd be really great way to build up your skill set, it would be a great stepping stone to the career that you want to get into. All of these things really help to paint a picture of why you'd be a really good candidate for the role and set you apart from other candidates. Highlight your transferable skills. So we kind of mentioned this a bit already in terms of that customer assistant role in Tesco, that there's loads of transferable skills that could be used in other roles. So think about things like working as part of a team, customer service, problem solving, prioritizing, things that come up. I mean, service industry roles are actually quite difficult, and you do a lot of juggling of tasks. You do a lot of, you know, um, dealing with customers and like client satisfaction and like setting expectations and things like that. And they're all things that you might be using in a kind of office-based role. So do make sure that you're highlighting those in your application, in your cover letter. Tell us about relevant learning you've done. So I kind of already mentioned this. So it doesn't need to be formal learning. It can be a diploma or a certificate that you work towards, or it can be something that is like a self-led online course. That's all relevant, and it shows that you're really interested in growing and you're really interested in this topic itself as well. And then think about how your hobbies might be relevant. So, like we were talking about earlier with our candidate, um, there they were volunteering with a youth group for 4 years, um, and again, you're building up a lot of transferable skills there that are going to be possible to apply in your role. So whether it's team leadership, managing budgets, working putting together a schedule, all of those things are important. So even though you mightn't have been paid for those things, they're still really valuable work experience. So that's kind of a guide of things to put on your CV again, or sorry, things to put on your application. If you're putting together a cover letter, and it's your first time doing that, because some roles specifically ask for a cover letter, again, Google like good formats for cover letters, and then you can just the start and the finish, the sign off are always going to be the same. It's the bit in the middle that's really important that tell the recruiter and the hiring manager about you and why you're really good for that role. So now we're going to move on to LinkedIn and job searches. I know a lot of people, when they start out, are hesitant to set up a LinkedIn profile because they think, I don't really have anything to put on there. I absolutely encourage you to set one up. Even if you're not really using it, even if you don't have a huge amount to put on it, it means that when it comes to A, searching for roles, LinkedIn is such a good tool for searching for roles. And then B, making connections. So, I mean, they could be anyone from past colleagues, people who come in and give talks, people who you might have, worked with in a volunteering capacity with. All those people, those connections can be really useful when you go on. I mean, I know that at one point I was applying for a role, and through LinkedIn, I was able to see that I had a friend who worked in that company and actually worked on that team. And I didn't really know what he did in his day-to-day basis before I saw that. But because I saw on LinkedIn, oh, he works there, I was able to have a chat with him. He was able to give me some recommendations, and I ended up getting that role. But that was really because I was able to make those connections and figure out, okay, can you give me some advice on what they're looking for on this team? Can you give me some advice on, how to tailor my CV to be kind of the most interesting? So LinkedIn is a super interesting, super useful tool. So absolutely set one up today. You don't have to keep checking it every day. It's not a super fun platform, but it is incredibly useful. So here are some tips for LinkedIn. So I've already covered the kind of why, even if it's not super full, to set one up. Select the skills in the roles that you're looking for and the skills that you have. So on LinkedIn, you're able to add in skills and it makes you a lot more searchable. So if there are skills like data, problem solving, like I would have skills on there in terms of like stakeholder management, let's say, for example, or program coordination. So, all of those skills that you add in, you can add up to 50 skills. But again, they make you a lot more searchable because that might be one of the ways that recruiters are searching for candidates. Um, if you're creative, so if you are a digital editor, if you are an illustrator, if you are creating any sort of content, create a portfolio and make sure that you're adding work to it. That portfolio could be an Instagram account, depending on what you do. It could be a Google Drive, a Dropbox, it could be a web page. It really depends on the type of work that you do. But it again goes back to that idea of okay, you do these things, but how do I know as a recruiter that you do these things well? And your portfolio is the way that I can tell, okay, this is where their skill sets, this is what their level is at. So it's super important that you have that portfolio together. A cover letter, we've already kind of covered, can help to demonstrate your passion for an opportunity. It's not, you don't always have to write a cover letter. But if they ask for it specifically, make sure you do because it might disqualify you from the application process if they have made it mandatory and you haven't filled one out. Contact people in companies rather than the recruiters. So recruiters get a huge amount of messages on LinkedIn every day. So if you're looking for advice or help on how to get into an industry, probably the recruiter is not the best person to ask because they're going to be focused on the roles that they have currently open. Whereas people who are in those roles that you potentially want to get into in the future are going to be a lot more likely to respond to you and say, give you a bit of advice or possibly, be willing to get a coffee with you, any of those things. So you're going to have a lot more success contacting specific people doing the roles that you'd like to do. And then networking, and now that we're back to a lot of in-person events, that's a really good way, talks that are specifically about your industry, careers fairs, actually getting to meet people face to face can be really useful because it gives you a much better idea of the opportunities that are out there. And again, it goes back to that idea of being able to then make connections with them on LinkedIn. And as you build up your network, it becomes super useful. So that is an overview of LinkedIn. I know it's not the most exciting, it's not the TikTok, it's not Instagram, but it is a really, really useful tool in terms of your job search. Another thing I would say is if you are looking for a role, you can set your LinkedIn to say, I'm currently open for work. And then you're going to appear. A lot of recruiters will, if they're looking for kind of entry level roles, they might filter down um, people that aren't looking for work currently because there's no point approaching them if they know that they're not looking for a new job. So I would recommend, and you can actually have a little green banner on your LinkedIn image as well, which says open for work. And again, it just makes you a lot more approachable and likely to be able to make some connections there. So now we're going to talk about personal branding. So this was what we were talking about earlier when, if you can see under the London UK bit and that dotted line, this piece that says candidate is passionate about providing excellent consumer experience, etc., etc. So this is the little blurb that you put together to really sell yourself to to recruiters. So how we approach this, because a lot of us don't feel comfortable with the idea of kind of tooting our own horn and selling ourselves, and you kind of just have to put that aside and swallow your pride there when you're putting together these applications because you're competing with people who aren't worried about looking like they're boasting and things. So you really have to kind of push yourself to make yourself sound as great as you are. So the three questions that you need to be asking yourself are, who are you? So do you have any professional qualifications? Do you have any role title? Do you have any area of expertise in terms of within the industry? Um, because that's going to be the first piece. Obviously, it's going to be your name, and it's going to be whatever you would identify yourself as. So I might say uh, I am a HR professional with expertise in the early careers space. Then, how do you want to be known? So, what are the kind of areas that you are particularly skilled at or that you are looking to build? What kind of sets you apart from those other candidates? And then what are your key skills? So, do you have a lot of expertise in the Adobe Creative Suite, for example? Or are you really excellent with managing finances? Um, and again, these key skills that you're listing off should be relevant to the type of role that you want to get into. So essentially, what you're putting together is a pitch. So think about like if you had three sentences to make yourself feel as appealing as possible to a potential employer, what are those kind of things that you want to include? Make sure it's concise. It shouldn't be more than really three sentences, because then it stops being a pitch and it starts just being you know, an elongated CV. Um, think about what you've achieved, Have you any particular accomplishments you'd like to point to? What you want to achieve? What kind of roles you want to have in the future? Um, anything that, any elements that you think would be either impressive or interesting. I have a colleague who always says, like, put something in your personal statement that makes you stand out, even if it's not super relevant. So let's say, for example, if you list off, like, as we were saying, all of the things that make you super applicable for the job, and then you could say, in my spare time, I breed ferrets. Or in my spare time, I mean, like me personally, in my spare time, I upcycle clothes and furniture. I'm probably not going to be doing that in the day to day of my role, but it kind of makes you stand out amongst the kind of hundreds of CVs and applications that these recruiters are going to be going through. So yes, one thing that'll capture the recruiter's attention. So if we look at an example of this, so uh, I have over 2 years experience in a fast-paced customer-facing roles, and I am passionate about providing excellent customer service. This is demonstrated by me recently being awarded Employee of the Week 3 consecutive weeks in my current role due to outstanding customer service. So again, this is not just this person saying I'm really amazing, it's saying I'm really amazing, and this is some evidence to prove why I'm amazing. In addition to this, I have 4 years providing guidance and mentoring to vulnerable youth. I'm keen to grow this mentoring skill in the future. So again, looking at what kind of skills you already have and what kind of skills you want to build on, where you want to be in the future. Recently, I developed an interest in sustainable food production and have just harvested my first batch of windowsill grown chilies. Now, you're probably not going to be doing that in your role, but again, it goes back to that idea that we were mentioning before. What's one thing that'll capture a recruiter's attention? So when you're going through the interview process, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that person who grows chilies." It's more useful than you think because it can be very repetitive for recruiters to go through all of these CVs. So any way that you can make yourself stand out in a positive way is going to be super helpful. So that is everything from me today. I will pause for a second in case anyone has questions in the chat. Um, but if not, I will say that in 2 weeks' time, so on the 22nd, we are having um, another YouTube live, this time around the idea of interviews and interview adjustments. So, if you have a disability or require some sort of accommodation, we're going to be talking through from a kind of employer point of view how you should approach asking for accommodations, what are the type of accommodations or adjustments that you can get at interview, and what's the best way of disclosing your disability or disclosing your need for adjustments. So please do join us for that. That's something that I'm super passionate about and can be a really tricky area for people to navigate. Um, so hopefully we can really demystify that and answer a lot of your questions. I don't see any questions in the chat, so we are going to wrap up there. Um, we are going to be in Leeds at uh, at one of the careers festivals, so that's next week on the 17th, actually a week from today. You'll see that information down below, as well as information on our apprenticeships and our upcoming virtual work experience. So there, all of those links are in the bio. Um, and yet, don't forget to give a like to the video because that always helps us, and click subscribe as well so you keep updated on all of these sessions. Thanks so much, everyone, and I will see you next time.